What began as an ordinary summer afternoon in one of Illinois' safest communities soon turned into a chilling mystery that would haunt a family and a town for decades. 15-year-old Christy Wesselman left home for a quick trip to the store just minutes away, expecting to return with a soda and chocolate bar. She never came back. Christy was born on April 19, 1970, in Glen Ellen, Illinois, and lived with her mother, two older brothers, and sister. Glen Ellen was the kind of town where kids rode bikes freely, played in the streets, and parents rarely worried. Christy thrived in that environment, outgoing, athletic, and deeply involved in school. She played volleyball and softball and had recently been elected vice president of her class. That summer in 1985, she was taking extra classes and spending most of her time with friends. On July 21st, after returning from school around 3:30 p.m., Christy told her mother she was heading to the nearby store. The errand was quick, the kind that wouldn't normally raise any concerns. Her mother expected her home in minutes, but as the evening wore on and Christy failed to return, unease began to creep in. Initially, Christy's mom assumed she may have bumped into friends along the way. With no cell phones back then, she had no way of checking in. But as daylight faded, worry turned to fear. She began calling Christy's friends. None had seen her that day. Desperate, she retraced Christy's likely path to the store herself, scanning every sidewalk and side street. But there was no sign of her daughter. By 1:50 a.m., after hours of searching on foot, Christy's mother contacted the police. Officers joined the effort immediately, starting with Christy's last confirmed whereabouts. The store clerk remembered Christy well. He lived nearby and had even babysat her years earlier. He told investigators she'd come in around 4 p.m., bought some candy bars, and left. She hadn't said where she was headed, but he noted she appeared cheerful and nothing about her demeanor raised concern. Other witnesses at the store confirmed her presence, but none could say where she went afterward. Detectives canvassed the area, hoping a friend or passerby had seen Christy, but no one had. The trail was already going cold. As officers continued the search into the early hours of the morning, one detective on the day shift suggested retracing what was likely Christy's route. He hypothesized that, like many local kids, she may have taken a shortcut through a large vacant field between her home and the store. The lot, filled with tall grass, wasn't visible from the road. It was common knowledge among neighborhood kids that the field cut several minutes off the walk. A narrow footpath wound through it, created by years of foot traffic. The detective followed that path, pushing through the overgrown grass, until something caught his eye. There, concealed among the weeds, was the body of a young girl. He recognized her immediately. It was Christy. The area was cordoned off, and forensic experts were called to the scene. But their search for evidence yielded nothing. No personal belongings, no signs of a struggle, no footprints. Whoever had attacked Christy left no obvious trace. The medical examiner determined that Christy had suffered 8 stab wounds. Evidence of sexual assault was also found. Importantly, biological material belonging to the perpetrator was collected. But in 1985, DNA testing was still a nascent technology, rarely used in criminal investigations. The sample was carefully preserved, its significance not yet fully understood. Another detail emerged from Christy's mother. Her daughter had been wearing a pearl ring the day she disappeared, but at the crime scene, it was nowhere to be found. Investigators believed the killer may have taken it, perhaps as a trophy. Police circulated descriptions of the ring and asked local pawn shops to be on alert in case someone attempted to sell it. Despite these efforts, The case quickly went cold. The murder of Christy Wesselman would remain unsolved for decades, until a completely unexpected break brought the truth to light. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us grow. A huge thank you to everyone who's been watching. With no physical evidence to build on, investigators turned their attention to finding witnesses who might have seen Christy or her killer near the field where her body was found. Several people who used the same shortcut around the estimated time of the murder were tracked down and interviewed, but none recalled seeing anything out of the ordinary. It was a baffling situation. Christy's body had been left just a few yards from the well-worn path, concealed only by the tall summer grass. Yet, despite the proximity, no one saw a thing. Adding to the mystery, detectives learned that a family living just a few dozen yards from the crime scene had hosted a backyard barbecue that same afternoon. Still, none of the guests remembered hearing screams or seeing anything suspicious. Even more remarkably, an employee working a full shift at a gas station just 60 yards from the field also reported nothing unusual. To the police, it seemed almost surreal. The crime had occurred in a place where people were present, in homes, at work, outdoors, yet no one heard a sound. Investigators theorized that the killer may have followed Christy from the store or encountered her by chance along the path. With quiet precision, he could have coaxed or forced her just a few feet off the trail and committed the murder in near total silence. Another possibility troubled detectives. What if Christy had known her attacker? In a small town where everyone knew one another, it could explain why there were no cries for help. Police began reviewing men in Christy's social circle, hoping a familiar face might hold the key. They also compiled a list of local men with previous violent offenses. A number of suspects were investigated, but none could be linked to the crime. Months passed, then years. Despite an ongoing investigation, every lead ended in disappointment. The case grew cold. Then, in 1988, 3 years after Christy's murder, technology offered a glimmer of hope. DNA analysis was becoming a powerful tool in criminal investigations. Detectives decided to re-interview former suspects and collect DNA samples where possible. Dozens of men willingly provided samples. None of them matched the DNA left behind by Christy's killer. But one man refused. Dana Henry, a 34-year-old who lived near the field where Christy had been found, had been on the police's radar since the beginning. He had denied any involvement, and there had been no evidence linking him to the scene. But now, his refusal to give a DNA sample cast a new shadow over his name. Authorities sought a court order. At the hearing, Henry continued to assert his innocence, but he was found in contempt of court and held in jail for several days. Under pressure, he eventually relented and provided a sample. The results came back. He was not the killer. Despite being cleared by DNA evidence, Dana Henry's life was irreparably damaged. In interviews following his release, Henry described being held in a jail cell without clothing. He said the mounting legal fees, totaling nearly $50,000, forced him to mortgage his home, which he ultimately lost. He also lost something less tangible but equally devastating: his reputation. Friends and family distanced themselves. Suspicion clung to him even after science proved his innocence. Henry filed a lawsuit against the police department, but it gained little traction. In the eyes of many, he remained a man associated with a child's murder. Years later, he would admit to reporters that while he had never been formally charged, the experience had destroyed his life. For another year after Dana Henry was cleared, the case of Christy Wesselman's murder remained frozen in time. Then, in 1989, an unexpected and unsettling twist brought the investigation back into public view. A judge issued a restraining order against a local man named Willis, who had been relentlessly contacting Christie's family with tips about who he believed was responsible for her murder. It had started back in late 1985, just months after the killing. When Willis reached out to the Wesselmans, claiming he had valuable information. Over the next 4 years, he flooded them with supposed leads, but each time police investigated his claims, they were either implausible or entirely irrelevant. Eventually, the family had enough. The constant emotional strain pushed them to file a complaint, and a judge barred Willis from contacting them again. Curious about his obsession, investigators looked into Willis as a potential suspect. But after a thorough review, they found no evidence connecting him to the crime. In 2000, Christie's killer's DNA was officially uploaded into the FBI's Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, offering new hope that a future match could help solve the case. But years passed without a hit. The trail went cold again. Detectives would occasionally revisit the file, follow up on tips, or re-examine old leads, but nothing ever brought them closer to the truth. Then, in 2015, exactly 30 years after Christie was killed, a breakthrough came from the most unexpected of sources. Investigators received a notification from the FBI database. The DNA profile from the Christie Wesselman case had matched a newly uploaded sample. It belonged to a 62-year-old man named Michael Jones, living in the quiet town of Champaign, about 150 miles from Glen Ellen. Jones's DNA had entered the system following a recent arrest for domestic violence. His wife had reported the abuse, triggering his detention. And thanks to an Illinois law passed in 2002, suspects in criminal cases were required to provide DNA samples, regardless of conviction. Ironically, this very law had been championed by the state's attorney from the same county where Christie's murder occurred, in large part because of the frustration surrounding her unsolved case. With the match confirmed, investigators quickly turned their attention to Michael Jones. What shocked detectives was that his name had never once surfaced in the investigation. He wasn't listed as a suspect, witness, or even a peripheral figure. It was as though he had been a ghost, completely invisible to the original team, but his criminal record painted a far darker picture. Jones's first documented offense dated back to the mid-1970s, when he assaulted a woman but faced little to no serious consequences. A year later, he violently attacked another woman and abandoned her in a hospital parking lot. When police issued a warrant, he turned himself in, claiming remorse and mental instability. He told the court he respected the law and needed psychiatric help. However, a court-appointed psychiatrist concluded that Jones was fully aware of his actions. He was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison, but ended up serving just 6. By 1983, he was back on the streets, 2 years before Christie's murder. His victim never knew of his early release. When informed later, she stated that had she known, she would have done everything in her power to prevent it. Jones married shortly after his release, but the relationship deteriorated. In 1994, his wife obtained a restraining order, citing an unhealthy interest he had shown in one of her young relatives. Despite the disturbing nature of the accusation, no charges were filed. In 1999, he was arrested again, this time for assaulting a family member of his new girlfriend. Detectives also learned that Jones frequently took solo motorcycle trips and often visited relatives in Chicago. Glen Ellen, Christie's hometown, lay right along one of his common routes. If he had simply passed through town during one of his trips, it would explain why his name never appeared in the case. A few hours was all it took for him to commit the crime and vanish without a trace. When investigators contacted Christie's mother about Jones, she didn't think much of it. Over the years, she'd grown used to the occasional check-in from police. But everything changed once they confirmed that his DNA was an exact match to the evidence collected from the scene 30 years earlier. Police visited her in person to deliver the news. The man who had murdered her daughter had finally been identified. After decades of anguish, uncertainty, and silence, the truth had emerged at last. Before officially charging Michael Jones with the murder of Christy Wesselman, investigators spoke with his former girlfriend to learn more about the man behind the DNA match. What they discovered only deepened their concerns. She described Jones as dangerously unpredictable, calm one moment, then suddenly erupting in rage without warning. She also revealed that he had an unusual obsession with detective novels and true crime television shows, often watching them for hours. These revelations fueled suspicions that Christie's murder may not have been an isolated act. Jones's erratic behavior, criminal history, and deep fascination with crime suggested a chilling possibility. He may have committed other unsolved crimes and simply known how to cover his tracks. With the evidence mounting, authorities formally charged Michael Jones on September 18, 2015, 30 years after Christie was murdered. Jones denied any involvement, and the case moved to trial. But justice wouldn't be swift. The legal process dragged on for 3 more years, and the trial didn't begin until 2018. Prosecutors pushed for a life sentence, citing the brutality of the crime and the overwhelming DNA evidence. But in a last-minute decision, Jones chose to plead guilty in exchange for a lighter sentence. As part of the plea deal, he was not required to provide any details about the murder. But with the DNA match, there was no doubt about his guilt. The judge sentenced Michael Jones to 80 years in prison, with parole eligibility beginning in 2095, effectively ensuring he would never walk free again. For Christie's family, the moment was bittersweet. They thanked investigators for finally solving the case, but her mother could not hide her anguish. She pointed out that if Jones had served the full 10-year sentence for his previous violent crime, he would have still been behind bars in 1985, and Christie might still be alive. Instead, a system that allowed his early release cost her daughter her life. Also present in the courtroom was Dana Henry, the man who had once been wrongly suspected of Christie's murder. In a quiet interview afterward, he reflected on the years he had spent under a cloud of suspicion. The false accusations had left lasting damage. Even decades later, he admitted, the stigma still followed him. He had hoped that seeing the real killer brought to justice might bring him peace. It didn't. Henry also noted with visible bitterness that no one from the police department ever apologized to him. No officer, no official, no representative of the justice system had ever acknowledged what he endured, let alone been held accountable for it. The conviction of Michael Jones may have closed one of Illinois' most haunting cold cases. But for many of those involved, the pain and fallout of Christy Wesselman's murder will never truly fade.